Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Few professions are as admired and respected as that of the firefighter. When others flee, they go forward into the fire.
Yet, almost without a single alarm bell sounding, Britain's fire services have been allowed by successive governments of all parties to slide down the pole in terms of wages and conditions, and, more importantly for the rest of us, cuts in appliances and the closure of fire stations is now starting to cost lives.
Paul Embery is London Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union. I first met him in the run-up to the war on Iraq when, like me, he was prominent in the effort to stop Britain setting fire to other people's countries. Now he's having to try and stop fire service cuts setting fire to our own. He joins us now. Paul, welcome on board the Sputnik. It's the 150th anniversary of the London Fire Brigade, but is being marked by a quite dramatic increase in incidents where people are perishing and being badly hurt in fires. And you say, and I agree, that's partly down to cuts.
I think it's directly attributable to cuts. We've seen huge cuts taking place in the London Fire Brigade, particularly over the last 2 years. Boris Johnson in 2014 closed 10 fire stations in London, fire stations that collectively had been protecting Londoners for around 900 years. We saw 600 firefighter jobs go in London as a result of that. And it's no coincidence, I think, that since then, response times across London have increased. In fact, across half of London, council wards, response times went up after those cuts took place. And the really disturbing thing is that in a third of London now, the London Fire Brigade is not able to meet its own target response times for the arrival of the first appliance. And you're quite right that that has led to a number of incidents, particularly recently, where people have died in fires in areas where the local fire station has been closed. And more generally to an increase in response times, which has also resulted in some people dying as well. It's a really disturbing trend, and it's absolutely attributable to the cuts that are taking place.
You see, most things that politicians do, I understand, even if I disagree with them, I understand where it comes from. This one I can't understand. We're living in an era where Paris-style events, we're told, massacre, requiring multiple responses from the various emergency services are imminent, are in the air. We wouldn't be surprised if we woke up to discover that something like that was underway. And yet at the same time, we're cutting our emergency responders.
I just want to add to that, because when they're cutting down the NHS, I can see that they can afford to go to their private clinics. But how, who's going to save them in a fire? But you.
Absolutely, and I think the reason for that is it's the whole cuts agenda is predicated on the argument that there are fewer fires taking place now than there used to be. Now, okay, that's a fact, we accept that, but the point is the fire service has always done, and more so now, does a whole range of other work that doesn't involve fighting fires. We're carrying out...
Including educating people on how to avoid fires.
Including educating people, going into schools, going into old people's homes, and rescuing people from incidents that are non-fire related incidents. So people who are shut in lifts, for example, people involved in chemical incidents, people involved in flooding, with some of the really serious flooding that's been going on recently. There are 38,000 rescues carried out by the fire service across the UK every single year. There's over 100 rescues a day. And if you make the argument that, well, we're having fewer fires, therefore we should cut the fire brigade, then I think you're completely missing the point. And I think also that argument is effectively based on the supply and demand argument, which is not fit for the fire service. You cannot run the fire service according to the laws of supply and demand. It's got to be based around risk. And the logic of the supply and demand argument is that, for example, you would close the fire station at Heathrow Airport on the grounds that, well, there hasn't been a major incident there for a number of years. That's not the point. The point is, if it did happen, would you have the resources in place to be able to do it? And the logic of their argument is that, well, because there are fewer fires occurring now, then people can afford to wait longer in the event they are trapped in a fire. It's a complete
non sequitur. I think Gayatri, she's got the bull point that the reason the fire brigade 150 years ago came into being as one fire brigade was that you can't have a privatized response to fires. You have to have fire cover applicable across the whole territory. You can't, for example, have a Kensington and Chelsea fire brigade which is able to fight rich people's fires, whilst Barking might have no fire cover at all. No one would accept that in a democracy. So if you need a centrally organized fire brigade, then it just doesn't make sense to be cutting it. But what's more worrying is, as you said, without hardly an alarm bell ringing, this has happened. How many Londoners know, for example, that, what did you say, 10 fire stations have been closed? Umpteen appliances decommissioned? Very few people, I think, are aware of that.
I think you're right, and I think the history that you set out is a correct one. And the reason why municipal fire services like the London Fire Brigade came into being in the first place is because people saw the nonsense of having a private firefighting system that went before that, where, for example, you would have insurance companies who would protect people from fire, and people would have plaques on the front of their houses to denote which insurance company they belonged to. And in some cases, believe it or not, insurance companies would turn out, and if the plaque didn't represent their own company, they'd turn away and go away. God forbid.
Sounds like the American health system.
Well, exactly, and God forbid we ever go back to a system which I think some of the more extreme people involved in the fire service and within government would like to see. But you're quite right, the public, in many cases, I don't think know the half of it. We've lost 7,000 frontline firefighters since 2010, since this government came into power. In the last recorded year, we lost 1,800 frontline firefighter posts, the biggest loss in a single year. We've seen a cut in central government funding of 30% since 2010. And if you look at the forecasts for the economy over the next few years, then I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. So it's really, really serious. And this is really impacting on people now. I mean, it's not a theoretical debate anymore. When we've argued in the Fire Brigades Union for years and years that this will result in people dying because they've had to wait too long for a fire engine to get there, we're seeing that now. We know the names of people who are dying. We know the families of people who have lost their lives because their local fire station has closed and because the fire service, through no fault of the firefighters, have taken too long to get there because they're spread too thinly. So this is a real serious debate and it's impacting on people in a fundamentally serious way.
Is it a British development, or do you see this happening throughout Europe?
Well, I think it is happening throughout Europe. If you look at the austerity and the cuts and the privatisation that has been imposed throughout Europe in recent years, then it's no doubt that firefighting services across the continent, all public services, in fact, are under huge pressure. I mean, I have to say we've got a government in this country that I think is very keen to cut the fire service as much as it can, which is a complete about turn from what it said before the election. On the eve of the general election in 2010, David Cameron went to a fire station in Carlisle in the north of England and gave a commitment that there would be no frontline cuts to the fire service. And of course, as soon as he won the vote, he set about trying to cut the fire service as much as he could.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, indeed.
Now, the reason I'm particularly emotionally attached to the Fire Brigades Union is, I always make this point, that actually the existence of firefighters, like the people you represent, is a challenge to the idea that humankind is inherently selfish, that the capitalist market forces is the only way we can organize things. Because, of course, in truth, if your members were to negotiate a separate deal every time they turned up at a fire, I mean, if you turned up at my house and my children were in the house, I would give you everything I own in order to go in and save them. Or if my worldly goods were at risk. I'd pay any amount of money to you. And you could stand there saying, no, you need to put your offer up a bit. But of course, no firefighter does that or would dream of doing it. They plunge into the fire. So philosophically, the very existence of your service and the dedication of the people involved in it is a challenge to the selfishness of
well, speaking of this instinct, remember this Kidzania, it's his children play heaven, this new thing that they have in the country where they basically show children an introduction to the different professions. They've got different outlets, the police, the fire engine, journalism, everything, yeah? But
and the kids play it being.
Yeah, they pretend play it and they learn about it.
Yeah.
And the fire engine, fire brigade is the most popular
one. The queue was a mile long. My kids could not get in to dress up as firefighters and get on the
of course,
fire
it's the most
engine.
exciting one, but instinctively, probably it also is an indication.
People are drawn to it. So you've got this tremendous respect and admiration from people. The question is how we turn that into political leverage, isn't it?
I think you're right. And in terms of public perception, the fire service has always been held in very great esteem. And people say, and I think there's a lot of merit in it, public services are socialism in action, aren't they? You know, particularly the National Health Service, where everybody pays in, and if you need it, then society provides it for you free at the point of delivery. And it's probably the best thing as a nation we ever did, the National Health Service. And I think our real fear is the mission creep in terms of privatisation of the fire service. I mean, this government is talking about mutualisation as a stepping stone, frankly, to privatisation. We are seeing chunks of the fire service, not particularly the front line at the moment, although in some cases, yes, even that. But certainly some of the other functions within the fire service are being sold off to the privateers. And I've no doubt that some of the hawks within government pushing privatisation would like to see that rife throughout the fire service and other public services. And I think there is a real fear that we could end up back in those days more than 150 years ago where people actually have to pay for a fire service, otherwise
they check your plaque to see whether they're going to turn the hose on or not.
Whether it would be something particularly like that, but nonetheless where there would be a private firefighting service that people, unless they're paid in, they can go swing. That is a real fear.
How do people, can people, have you got a website, can people express their support for the firefighters?
Yeah, I mean, our website in the Fire Brigades Union, fbu.org.uk, sets out all of the campaigns that we're running in the Fire Brigades Union at the moment, locally and nationally. It's not just in London, there are huge cuts in the fire service taking place nationally. Leicestershire recently stood to lose a third of its entire firefighting capability. Fortunately, the local firefighters run a fantastic campaign and have staved off some of those cuts. South Yorkshire, Merseyside, around the country, there are some real serious cuts taking place, and we need people behind us, absolutely.
fbu.org.uk.
Indeed.
Go there.
Coming up next, he's walking in the air, but his feet are squarely on terra firma. Howard Blake OBE of Hollywood and Westminster. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. Howard Blake is a world-famous composer. Channel 4's The Snowman, enjoyed by everyone in this country, I would think, and Dino De Laurentiis's Flash Gordon are just two of his gigantic successes. He's worked with Queen and David Bowie, but it was a story involving the real Queen which caught my eye, although nobody would know it unless, like me, they happened to hear it by chance.
The preamble to the Charter of the United Nations consists of fine words indeed. Written at the end of the Second World War, most people would interpret it as a determined plea for world peace. And that is where Howard Blake OBE's problem came in.
Howard Blake is with us now. Howard, the preamble to the United Nations is just about the most stirring piece of